Hi, this is my review of Ghost Panzer, which is part of the Band of Brothers series of World War II squad-based wargames from Worthington. This is the remastered edition. Look at the back of the box. Difficulty 3 out of 10. Yeah, this is a very straightforward game. It's a two-player game. You can play it solo, playing both sides. The game focuses on the narrative of the Ghost Panzer, which is the German 11th Panzer, and is a Eastern Front game. You get German and Soviet counters. So first up, the rulebook is the same rulebook that's in the other Band of Brothers game, which is about the Screaming Eagles, the 101st Airborne. The rulebook, pretty much my comments will be the same as I said in my other video where I talked about that game. The rulebook is pretty well written. Didn't have too many problems. There are some examples of play. It goes through quite a leisurely pace, talking through all the key mechanics of the game. The one thing to notice in this game is that there are lots of vehicles as well, as you'd expect with an Eastern Front game. So a lot of tank battles and anti-tank guns and half-tracks, things like that. I would say that the game is very straightforward to play. If you're familiar with squad-based World War II war games, this is probably on the lighter side, I would say. There are some specifics around, say for example, vehicles with flamethrowers and Stukas and things like that. But yeah, generally speaking, I found it very straightforward. The only rules that I came across that I kind of did scratch my head a little bit over on the read-through and when I first started playing the game was around anti-tank weapons, such as bazookas, Panzerfausts, things like that. But I just went through the rules a couple of times and managed to work it out. But generally speaking, it's a very straightforward game. I actually think it's more straightforward sometimes than the rulebook alludes to in many ways. I don't know how many pages of rules there are in the rulebook. Quite a few, and it's as you can see, there are optional rules. There's a great extended gameplay example. So yeah, we're up to about at page 18 or 19. I think the core rules of this game you could probably describe in 4 to 6 pages, if I'm being honest. It's a very straightforward, light squad-based game. In fact, I think it's probably one of the more straightforward of those types of games, the more light of those types of games in my collection. Next up, the scenario booklet. You get a lot of scenarios. You get a lot of content in this game. Scenarios start up at there's an infantry training scenario, and then you're straight into, in fact it's 2 of those, one for infantry and one for tanks. Tanks one, you've got lots of T-34s as you'd expect, Panzer 3s, Panzer 4s. Starts off with scenario 19. The reason for that is the first game in the series, which is about the airborne, American airborne, went up to scenario 18, I think, so starts off scenario 19. The one thing I would say compared to that game, the scenarios tend to be bigger, use more counters and more map boards. So the scenario details how many map boards you are going to use, their orientation. There are 6 map boards, for example, on this scenario, and this is one of the first scenarios, and a lot more counters. So for example, in this scenario here, we've got 4 map boards, 14 Soviet infantry counters at the start, and then some more reinforcements later. Probably just worth calling out some of the counter types that you have in the scenario. So for example, this scenario here, we've got Panzer 4s, we've got an 88 anti-tank, we've got half-tracks. This scenario, we've got a variety of different Soviet pieces of armour. And again, like I said, there's a lot of scenarios in the game. This scenario, for example, one of the large ones has 6 map boards, 10 infantry and loads of tanks as well. The scenarios also give you a good historical flavour of inspiration behind the scenario. The boards are all geomorphic, so you can orientate them different round for different scenarios. And as you can see, you get a lot. I've played through every single scenario in this game. And there's a lot of game here. This scenario, for example, uses all 9 boards. which is great. And for example, you've got, you know, around 12, 15, 20 infantry counters, loads of different tank counters as well. So yeah, big scenario there. Again, another big game board here with 8 different map boards on, and a whole ton of counters as well. So generally speaking, compared to the other game in the series, the scenarios tend to be bigger, tend to use more map boards, and tend to have a lot more infantry counters in the actual scenario, which is great. So next up, components. I've set this game up example here. 4 boards. The boards look great. They are a nice heavy cardstock. They lay nice and flat. They sort of join up well together, even though they're geomorphic, and they look great. I think they look absolutely great. The counters are nice and big and chunky. Again, a good cardstock. They're very durable. I've got all the games in this range, and had them a while and play them a lot, and they've held up really well. It's very clear. You can clearly see the red Soviet and the sort of grey for the Germans here. In this particular scenario, we've got some half tracks, German half tracks with infantry. I've got a couple of Panzer IIIs. The Soviets infantry. They've got some anti-tank rifles, anti-tank gun, and they're sort of defending this village. I would say a lot of the scenarios do tend to be very much in this game one side attacking, one side defending, for the most part, I would say, which I enjoy. Things I like about this game, when it's your turn, you can't activate all of your counters. You have to. There's a number of counters you can activate based around your operations range. So, for example, in this particular game, the German player has 6, between 2 and 6 they can activate, but a tank or a gun, heavy gun, counts as 3. So I could move a couple of tanks if I wanted to, or I could move a couple of more infantry counters if I wanted to, for example. What that means is that when it's my turn, I'm not moving everything. I have to pick and choose, and then it's quite quick to the other player to do the same, and then back to me to carry on, and back to the other player to carry on until we've activated all of our counters. Once they've been activated, you put one of these small used counters on them like that, and you can still see the count underneath, which is nice. It's just a really simple, straightforward mechanic. Movement is incredibly straightforward and simple. There's a player aid. Let me just grab it. There's a player aid that has all the different environment, what's in the hexes, terrain types, and their movement cost. Very straightforward. The game has a very simple, no charts combat mechanic. Let's pick an example here. Let's say we've got this German counter firing on this Soviet counter here. The German counter needs a 6 or less on a D10 to hit that counter there, and of course, if that counter's in terrain, cover, buildings or woods or whatnot, there's a modifier. You roll your D10. If I was to get a 5, for example, that counter then would be suppressed, and you put a suppressed token on it. If it gets hit again, it gets more suppressed. What impact this has is when you try and activate that counter, you look at the suppression and it tells you the morale that you need to roll to be able to activate that counter. So this counter, for example, if you want to activate it, now it's suppressed, it needs a 5 or less to be able to activate that counter. It's just a really simple, elegant system. There's no charts or anything like that. Depending on what the dice roll you get, you may even find, if you get a very low number, which is a very good number in this game, you may inflict a step loss, gets flipped, and then you may even just, out and out be able to destroy that whole unit from one squad firing on it, for example. The same is very true for vehicle combat. It's very straightforward. Tells you everything you need to know on the counter. Tells you what numbers you need to roll depending on what you're firing against. The other counter tells you their value, their armor value. This is a very straightforward system. and the rules do a way better job of explaining it than I've just done. But effectively, when you read through the rule book, put a few counters out, try out the different mechanics. So range combat for infantry, range combat for vehicle versus vehicle, and then maybe close combat. Close combat is extremely effective. And the other thing I like about this game as well, if you start moving your counters in front of the enemy, they can opportunity fire on you, and it is particularly devastating. So what the game really is about you suppressing your enemy with suppression counters and then moving in and finishing them off. In particular, even if an enemy counter has been used, like say for example this one here, it's been used and I'm charging my infantry against it, when I get into the hex closest adjacent, they get a shot. Even though they've been used, they get a free opportunity fire shot against me, and it is particularly effective. So what you want to be doing is suppressing the infantry counter, because then for them to activate any action, they have to roll a 1 or less on a d10, very unlikely. And I've had a lot of fun playing this game solo and 2-player. With that mechanic, the uncertainty. Occasionally, of course, you do get the dice rolls you need, and that is the fickle hand of fate in wargaming. But essentially, this is what this game is about. It's about suppressing your enemy counters and then finishing them off in close combat. Occasionally you can finish them off in range combat, but particularly for the Soviet player, finishing them in close combat is probably the way to go. But you've got to suppress them first. Charging up against unsuppressed enemy, not a good idea. As I said, the armor combat, tanks combat is incredibly straightforward. You're rolling one. You roll a dice to see if you hit. If you get the right number, you'll take it out in one shot. Straightforward. The one thing maybe on the armor counters, to activate them, they don't have the morale, but they have a number here in the bottom right. Depending on the circumstances of what you're firing, you'll need to roll in these modifiers to see if you can actually even activate them. Generally speaking, for the most part, the German armor counters will do what you want. The Soviet counters a lot less so, unless they're at very close range. Yeah, and effectively that's the game. For me, what I like about this game is that, as you can see here, this is a medium-sized game set up for this particular game. Got quite a few counters, and you can enjoy a brisk, fast-paced. Don't need to look at the rules very much. There's no charts. The only player aid you're really going to be using is one, which has got your terrain modifiers, of which there aren't many, so you can probably memorize those. So fast, brisk, no charts, very straightforward, squad base, World War II game about a series of battles, and that's what I enjoy about that. You can play comfortably in an evening. This setup here, for example, this would probably take, I don't know, a bit over an hour, I guess, to play. Some of the larger games may take a couple of hours, some of the smaller ones even less than an hour. And it has that brisk pace, and there aren't too many squad-based World War II games that can have this many of counters and have that sort of brisker pace of gameplay that can be played comfortably in this amount of time. And it is because the rules are very streamlined. There aren't many. Every bit of information is on the counter. It has that nice, I've got decisions to make. I can't activate all my counters. What's my opponent going to do? You can play the game solo. I've played the game extensively solo. You're playing both sides. There's no AI. There's no bot. You're playing both sides to the best of what you think that side should be doing in that point in time, based maybe on the historical scenario or what their objective is. And I enjoy playing these types of games solo. I think this is a great game you can play in an evening. Very streamlined mechanics, as I've said several times now. Components are great. I've had a lot of fun with this series of games. As I've said, it's on the lighter side. I think for If you want something that you can play comfortably in the evening, maybe with people who don't normally play war games, or you just want something lighter, you know you're not going to have to keep checking up rules and things like that, I think this is a great option. This game's obviously focused solely on German forces fighting Soviet forces on the Eastern Front, whereas the other game in the series, the standalone game in the series anyway, the Screaming Eagles game is obviously based around the American 101st in Europe. So that might, if you prefer Eastern Front games, just one. If you prefer Western Front games, then I'd go with the other one in the range. They're both very similar. This one tends to have bigger battles, more tanks, as is the nature of the historical scenario, I would say. But yeah, and very much enjoyed this range. I play a whole range of World War II squad-based games. It's probably my favourite genre. And what this does, as I said, lots of counters, brisk sense of play, easy to play in an evening, great components. The rules are good. They are well written. They, as I've said, they kind of, the game's more straightforward than the rules may first appear, is how I would describe it. But yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you're in the market for an Eastern Front World War II game, and you've maybe got a tactical game, squad game, and you've got a few in your collection, I think this is a great addition. There may be, yeah, that's probably how I would describe it. Lots of counters, a lot of fun. Very much enjoyed it. And yeah, thanks for watching.